This is the CBS Evening News. Dan Rather reporting. Good evening. President Bush tonight delivers his first Oval Office speech to the nation. Subject, his plans for fighting the drug plague at home and abroad. Senator Joe Biden of Delaware will then deliver the official response of congressional Democrats. With many public opinion polls indicating drug crime and violence continuing to be the #1 concern among Americans, with whole neighborhoods being destroyed by addiction and death, questions abound about the war on drugs. White House correspondent Wyatt Andrews begins our coverage.
Not since President Bush's inaugural address has he refined and rehearsed a speech as much as this one. He sees tonight's address and the drug strategy he will present as one of his most important acts as president.
My speech will be a basis of a heart-to-heart talk with the American people. There's no question that the drugs are a quicksand of our entire society.
According to White House aides, this will not be a speech with any magic answers to the drug crisis. Instead, Mr. Bush will sell the idea, his theme, that everybody counts, that drugs should be attacked from all sides. Some of the highlights: a get-tough policy in the nation's schools, a demand that colleges and school systems adopt user sanctions against drug abusers in order to keep receiving federal funds, a new emphasis on drug treatment, federal grants totaling $925 million, but again with strings attached, treatment centers must treat cocaine addiction specifically. A broad expansion of foreign aid to drug-producing countries, the Andean strategy, $449 million, largely to help Bolivia, Peru, and Colombia wipe out the sources of cocaine. And new grants for local police forces to fight drugs, $350 million. Plus, the president will repeat his call to almost double the size of the federal prison system. Cost, $1.6 billion. While the president hopes all of that will add up to the speech of his life, the Democrats began running ads today ridiculing this new war on drugs as old hat.
Can we stop a new kind of killer with more of the same old ideas and timid measures?
Other Democrats wanted to know how the president will pay for what he is proposing and threatened the president with new taxes.
There's nothing to prohibit us from coming up with a $2 billion tax bill and slapping it right on top of the Bennett proposals, and I'm prepared to do just that.
What infuriates some congressmen the most is that the president will be asking for new money tonight, $2.2 billion, and yet will only suggest some ways that Congress might cut other programs to raise the funds. He declares the war, one congressman complained, while we have to nickel and dime to find the money. Wyatt Andrews, CBS News, the White House.
Correspondent Bob Schieffer is tracking some first reactions to the new Bush anti-drug strategy. Some of those reactions along political lines, some from America's front lines, where, after all, the war will be won or lost.
Time will be 4:25. Door the dime lock for $8.
Drug stings like this are around-the-clock business for the Houston police, so these cops and police all across the country really like the president's idea of focusing more of the fight on neighborhood law enforcement. In Chicago, where another drug roundup was underway, dealers were making $6,000 a day on one street corner alone. Chicago cops say just the sight of a drug bust is a deterrent.
For every 25 or 50 people we arrest, our suspicion is that at least 100 at the scene or who approached the scene while we were making an arrest will turn around and leave and not go back.
The problem is so bad, politicians are beginning to say there must be a crackdown on users as well as dealers.
These middle and upper income people that drive into low income neighborhoods and buy drugs on the street corner, they're just as responsible, and we ought to seize their automobiles.
Local officials also like the new administration emphasis on building more prisons, but warn that just putting dealers and users away won't come cheap and is only part of the solution.
It costs $10,000 a year to keep this guy off the street from stealing from his neighbors. It just makes all the sense in the world to me to add another $200 a year and give him some drug treatment.
Right there, be fine.
And that's what you hear all over the country, that it will take more than just good intentions or even first-class treatment facilities like this one in Houston.
I'm going to share a statement with you.
It's going to take money, a lot of it for a long time.
We do not have the funds to operate this facility. We've got a 250-bed facility here, and today we're operating 60 beds today.
Finding the money to pay for it without wrecking existing social programs is what really worries local officials.
we're being told that the money will come from someplace, but we're not going to raise taxes. That's fine. Don't raise taxes. But don't take it from the other programs that complement this effort.
It should be properly funded. Right now, it's a real joke in terms of the resources that have been provided by the federal government to cities all across America.
And that's very much the feeling here. Until Congress gets a lot more detail on just how the president intends to pay for all this, there will be considerable doubt here as to just how serious the administration really is. Bob Schieffer, CBS News at the Capitol.
Still ahead on tonight's CBS Evening News, Eric Ingberg looks at how far drugs have spread across the land. And Richard Threlkeld looks at what happened the last time our country fought cocaine.
I'd sell my soul for just one shot.
And won, as we begin our special coverage of America's drug crisis. One nation under siege. U.S. military equipment arrived in Colombia today, part of the stepped-up effort against the cocaine cartels of Colombia. Cutting off the drug pipeline at the cartel source is an important part of the president's anti-drug strategy. The response from the Colombian drug criminals, a campaign of narco-terror. Mark Phillips is covering for us in Colombia.
Today, it was a colonel's wife, murdered in her car on a Bogota street. She'd been picking up some eggs at the supermarket when a gunman opened the door of her car and shot her dead. The drug lords, who may well be responsible, have threatened the families of officials as well, and the drug lords do not make idle threats. These are anxious times in Colombia. It doesn't take much for a crowd to panic. In this case, it was a bomb scare at Bogota Airport. Every threat is considered real until proven otherwise. We are afraid to come to work, to be in our houses, she says. It's terrible. It is the cartels, not the government, which seems to be carrying the battle lately. A campaign of fear that may be working. At yet another bombing in Medellin, the blame for the violence is put less on the cartels than on world attention.
Is Colombia all the war about drugs. And the United States is making the boom about us. It's not good.
Colombia's anti-cartel battle has reached a crisis stage. There has not been a major arrest or property confiscation since the early days of the crackdown, and the government is still vacillating over whether to extradite to the United States the one accused cartel member it has managed to capture as the deadline approaches. The latest shipment of U.S. supplied equipment, 5 Huey helicopters, arrived today under extremely heavy security. The fight here is not just against a criminal element, like fighting the mafia in the U.S. What's at stake is who will run the country. I hope the institutions, the rule of law, what Colombians call democracy, can be saved, he says. Colombians will watch President Bush's address live on TV, wanting U.S. help, but knowing that American pressure is also raising the stakes for them here.
There'll be a lot more blood, and a lot more tears that we'll all shed, but we're ready to fight, and I think this is our last chance to recapture the country from the drug traffickers.
Blood and more of it is the one thing upon which the government and the drug barons agree. Mark Phillips, CBS News, Bogota.
Rebels in El Salvador said today they accept a government offer to begin peace talks next week. The rebels have Soviet and Cuban connections. The talks would be the first since the right-wing government of Alfredo Cristiani took office in June, replacing a more centrist government. More than 70,000 people have died in a decade of Salvadoran civil war. The Soviet Union tonight tried to throttle up new enthusiasm for its troubled space program. 2 cosmonauts blasted off this evening for the orbiting Mir space station, mothballed last April amid public complaints about the cost of the Soviet space program at a time of severe shortages of consumer goods. The Soviets are now trying to defray some of the space program cost. The booster rocket carries an ad for an Italian insurance company. Anti-apartheid forces in South Africa staged some of their biggest protests today in a mounting campaign to protest segregated elections set for tomorrow. Tens of thousands of black people joined a general strike. In one university town where white students joined black workers in a protest march, police arrested scores of them as they broke up the protest using whips and dogs. Tomorrow's parliamentary elections are seen as the stiffest test yet for the ruling National Party and its program of limited racial reforms. The main challenge comes from the political far right, which wants to go back to a more rigid form of apartheid. More signs today of the power struggle still underway among communists in China. The official press ran a lengthy attack on Western influence in the arts, one day after the government fired its Minister of Culture, an advocate of more free expression. But Chinese sources report the party's ruling hardliners are running into heavy resistance in government agencies as they try to purge and punish supporters of last spring's movement for freedom and democracy. Even some officials of the secret police are reportedly afraid now of another change in the political climate and have refused to carry out orders from the top. In New York today, the startling disclosure that just one day before his death at the age of 51, the late baseball commissioner A. Bart Giamatti was warned about his health. Betsy Aaron reports.
The day was August 20th on television, Dodgers versus the Mets. The TV in Dr. William Cahan's living room tuned to the game. Cahan is senior attending surgeon at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center. In the stands, baseball commissioner Bart Giamatti.
I said, oh my God, he smokes. I said, wait a minute. He not only smokes, but the fingers holding that cigarette are clubbed. It usually indicates something's wrong going on in their chest. Whether it's the lungs or with certain types of heart infections, we can't tell.
Clubbing can be an early sign of pulmonary disease such as emphysema or lung cancer. Clubbing itself is not painful, but its signs are obvious.
These fingers look like ordinary fingers, but as they approach the last bone of the finger, they swell. They swell, and the nail itself begins to get curved, not only from side to side, but from fore to aft.
Lung surgeon Cahan, a longtime crusader against smoking, wrote to the president of the American League, who was himself a doctor, Dr. Bobby Brown. He wanted to help Giamatti.
Well, this was a sterling individual, and I figured I just couldn't take that lying down.
You were looking at a very sick man on that television set.
Well, he would probably never have admitted it, but he gave every indication that he was in for trouble, and disaster, as a matter of fact.
Last Friday, A. Bartlett Giamatti died, full cardiac arrest. The American League president is quoted today as saying last Thursday he told Giamatti he really felt he should have a chest x-ray as soon as possible. Giamatti smiled and said it sounded like a good idea. Betsy Aaron, CBS News, New York.
For the tennis world today, it was farewell to a phenomenon and to an unforgettable career. Classy Chris Everett, appearing in her 19th and last U.S. Tennis Open, faced Zina Garrison in the quarterfinals. The 34-year-old Everett had beaten Garrison 9 times in their 10 previous meetings, but today, the 25-year-old Garrison fought to a 7-6, 6-2 victory. All that remained was a standing ovation for Everett and memories of 101 U.S. Open wins, more than any player in history.
And one can only guess at the thoughts running through.
Pain acts up. Even little things are a big effort. But I don't take aspirin anymore. I take Advil. Advil gives me hours of relief from arthritis pain, and it's gentler to my stomach than aspirin. Advil, advanced medicine for pain.
The crack and coke shoveled into the streets and bloodstreams of America's young doesn't stop in our major cities anymore. The terror now strikes deeper. Main Street, your street, anybody's street. Big-time drugs and dealers have invaded even small-town America. Correspondent Eric Ingberg investigated the growing danger close to home, everybody's home.
Williamsport, Pennsylvania, as you would expect of the town that's home to the Little League World Series, is a nice place to live. It is also a nice place to deal drugs.
An individual who's dealing drugs can move to an area like this, not have the competition that he or she had in a metropolitan area, and not have the physical risk either. The turf wars don't exist, so it's, well, for lack of a better way to explain it, it's a good place to do business sometimes in rural America.
In small towns and rural areas across the country, police are now battling everything from clandestine marijuana fields to speed labs on farms to crack houses. And the pushers are finding big city tactics work just fine in Main Street America.
Anything you say, Kenny, will be used against you in a court of law.
In Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, the chief of police told us of a 12-year-old kid with a walkie-talkie on his belt in a housing project peddling cocaine for a Jamaican dealer in New York.
It's easy to go out and buy drugs.
Mark Fisher, a one-time cocaine dealer in Williamsport, who now crusades against drugs.
I don't care what city you go to, what town you go to, you give me some money and you put me in an area and give me 12 hours, I'll find you drugs.
Authorities, who say these pictures document a sale, started finding crack on the streets of Williamsport this year. Here, as elsewhere, the spread of cocaine brought an increase in violent crimes.
I tell my children your father was killed because of drugs, and they know that.
For Brenda Hepler and her family, life in quiet Anderson County, South Carolina, seemed full of promise a year ago. Her husband, a gifted teacher, had just been named principal of an elementary school. Then, as Dennis Hepler left the school one night, two men demanded money to buy cocaine.
He was shot twice, once in the back, in the shoulder, and once in the back of the head.
How much money was involved here?
$67.
The killers were caught and convicted. But as hard drugs spread beyond the cities, authorities are being overwhelmed. In rural communities, the police often have large areas to cover and small budgets, weaknesses the drug dealers are exploiting.
Stay stable, man. I ain't gonna talk to you again.
In Anderson County, the sheriff has just 6 deputies doing narcotics work, like this raid of a suspected marijuana supplier. No deputy devotes full time to drugs.
We don't have enough people to answer the telephone when all the tips come in.
In Williamsport, undercover officers sometimes have to make do without cars.
Our agents have picked up bicycles and rode bicycles partway across the county to do a drug deal.
The dealers have no such budget problems. Little problem at all with transportation, thanks to interstate highways and airplanes, which give them ready access to small towns.
Unfortunately, whether people know it or not, this problem is going to be in their hometown.
You stay right where you at. Don't move.
What was once seen as a big city problem is now clearly simply an American problem. Eric Engberg, CBS News, Williamsport, Pennsylvania.
Newer, more addictive and deadlier drugs, new levels of violence in our streets, a new war on drugs, yet another new war on drugs declared by a president of the United States. President Bush is not the first, only the latest president to grapple with a war on drugs. It is in fact almost a 100 years war. That's right, cocaine and heroin were outlawed in 1914, marijuana banned in 1937. Declaring war on drugs is easy. We've done it dozens of times. Richard Threlkeld looks tonight at the legacy of the first cocaine wars, decades before the turn-on, tune-in, dropout generation was even born.
In watching him being treated by the tribe medicine man, I discovered the secret of the native herb cure-all tonic.
The last time America got hooked on cocaine was at the turn of the century.
And I'm now happy and glad and able to pass out to a sick and suffering world.
Then, as now, it started as a kind of curiosity, a standard ingredient in all sorts of potions. Douglas Fairbanks Sr., playing a character called Detective Coke Any Day, spoofed cocaine in this old silent movie. Eventually, cocaine became a curse, the stuff of lurid headlines. President Taft viewed it with alarm. Appalling, he said. The movies warned that cocaine was turning its victims into blithering idiots.
You gotta get hold of yourself.
I can't get hold of myself. I gotta have dope. I'm a hophead. I'd sell my soul for just one shot.
And in the 30s, America finally kicked its coke habit when the whole country rose up and basically just said no. Then as now, it's a pattern.
Cocaine is serving the same function in this drug epidemic that it served in the first one. It's sort of the cleanup hitter. It comes in and persuades people there is no safe minimum use of drugs.
Dr. David Musto, who's been studying all this, hopes that President Bush's drug strategy will be better than those of his predecessors.
New, tough penalties for drug pushers.
From Nixon to Reagan,
this is cocaine.
They've been short on action and long on promises to the voters.
If you can calm them down with a document, you have really accomplished something remarkably inexpensive and politically very satisfying.
Even though you haven't touched the problem.
Although you may not have done anything.
You want a war on drugs? These are the battle plans for Washington's wars on drugs over the last 16 years. So how come we aren't winning? In a way, we already are. Studies show that drug use is down among America's white middle class.
The problem, of course, is with the America that is neither white nor middle class.
Gives them money, gives them a sense of power, gives them prestige.
Terry Williams has spent the last 4 years studying the inner city kids who peddle drugs. It's a big business that blossomed 6 years ago when, in the midst of a recession, Washington cut back on its help to the big city poor, and along came crack.
At the point that we abandoned them, something extraordinary happened. There was a drop in the price of a kilo of cocaine. An illegal opportunity, in other words, emerged at that very point.
The Bush administration now means to get tough not only with drug peddlers, but drug users, too. And that'll mean cracking down on the very minority neighborhoods where the drug problem is the worst.
I come out of the blocks and I say, look, we need to get serious and punish these people because we haven't done it yet.
For the second time this century, Americans may now be afraid enough and angry enough to do something about cocaine. But there's a real danger that in our fury and impatience, we may turn the inner city into a sort of national whipping boy.
The inner city can become to be seen as a complete collection of drug abusers, and they don't deserve anything but punishment. But that isn't true. You have the most vigorous fighters against drug abuse in the entire country in the inner city.
I think we have to be careful of our fears, because our fears can take us to some places that in the future we'll be sorry we did it.
Sorry if in the zeal to solve our drug problem, we sacrifice that part of America most afflicted by it. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, New York.
And that's part of our world tonight. A reminder that after our start this week, all of next week, because of the drug problems and renewed efforts to whip it, CBS News broadcast will devote extensive coverage to One Nation Under Siege. Now, until our live coverage of the President's drug speech and Democratic response beginning tonight at 9 Eastern Time, Dan Rather reporting for the CBS Evening News. See you again soon.
I'm Harry Smith. Will the president's drug plan make a difference? Tomorrow, we'll ask drug czar William Bennett. Also, Ali Sheedy on her battle with drugs on CBS This Morning.
This is CBS.
Just ahead on 11 News at 6.
We've asked this man to imagine he's with the most beautiful woman in the world. We've asked Walter Kellogg to imagine the same thing. You can see the difference.
Walter?
Yes, dear.
What is she doing here?
They asked me to do this.
Walter?
Yes, dear.
Who's a bimbo?
Jeffrey Jones and Mary Gross are the people next door.
Wednesday on West 57th, an encore performance by Billy Crystal, Tom Hanks, and Chevy Chase. It's a special 3-star comedy edition of West 57th Wednesday.
This is CBS.